Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Jennifer Egan's novel, The Candy House. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview of what the book is about, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. I've reviewed A Visit from the Goon Squad, which is the first book in this series now, as well as Manhattan Beach, and I'll leave links below if you want to learn more about Jennifer Egan there. To get into the review, The Candy House is a very similar book to A Visit from the Goon Squad in the sense that it's a novel told through interconnected short stories. This book follows up on that one and uses many of the secondary and tertiary characters as the primary protagonists in this book. So we have a chapter from the perspective of Sasha's child, Lincoln. We have a chapter from the Hollander sons, who is Sasha's uncle. In the first novel, his three sons have a chapter, and we have a chapter from two of Lou's daughters, and they all kind of interconnect. The new element in this novel that I think is different is this book proposes that around 2010, Bix, who was introduced in the first book as a relatively minor character, who was friends with Drew and Sasha when they were going to university. He is essentially a Mark Zuckerberg figure. He has a social network working site called Mandala, and this site he is able to create a memory cube, which is essentially, if you choose to sign up for this service, your consciousness is uploaded to essentially like a neural network of memories that you're able to search memories, and you're able to search your own memories as well as the memories of other people. And there's also some other technologies that kind of go along with it, but that's kind of the main driver of the book. And many of the chapters, but not all of them, kind of follow the ramifications of this technology. So, for instance, one of Lou's daughters, Roxy, was like a teenage model, and she has fallen on hard times, and she's kind of going back and reliving some of her memories through this technology. Or about to do that in the chapter that she has. And I thought that was a really interesting concept. I think that the stories here, pound for pound, are at least as good, if not better, than the stories at A Visit from the Goon Squad. I think that from, roughly about 20% into the book till probably roughly 3/4 of the book, it really, really hits its stride. I think that the writing is pretty solid throughout the book. I think there's one or two chapters where it's exceptional. There's a chapter, for instance, I think the one chapter that was published prior to the novel being published, was a chapter about Lulu, who's another kind of tertiary character from the first book. And the writing for that is kind of the experimental writing, the PowerPoint chapter, as it were, in A Visit from the Goon Squad. It's kind of told in like basically 2 or 3 sentence chunks, almost as if it was like a rolling like Twitter feed. There's also a chapter that's told completely as emails. So those are kind of the two experimental chapters, as it were. And I don't think they really detract from the book. I don't know how much they really added to the book. I think that chapter, that it's the email chapter, is a really nice encapsulation of a lot of the characters, if you remember from the first book, who were involved with the actress Kitty Jackson. It's kind of that group kind of having another adventure, which is pretty interesting. So I was actually pleasantly surprised. I was a little worried going in. I saw some of the Goodreads ratings that I thought that the book was just kind of so-so, and I enjoyed it at least as much as the first book. I think that, if not more, I think the book comparatively doesn't have a strong theme. It's not as strongly it's not as strongly tied to two characters as the first one was. I think she does try to use this technology as something of a tie that goes throughout. If I had to say some negative things about it, there are some weaker short stories in here. And I think that it does, for me at least, it took me till at least probably the Lincoln chapter, which is about a quarter of the way into the book, to really get going. I think there are some times where Jennifer Egan doesn't know which characters to focus on. And so there are 3 stories told for the Hollander sons. I thought those were some of the weakest stories in the novel. I wish she had maybe found some other characters to follow. I didn't think they really necessarily tied too much into the theme overall as far as the technology and the uses of technology and what they can be done with technology. And so for me, those are the weaker things. There's also kind of an undercurrent of American espionage or American military forces that kind of runs throughout the current, but she didn't really do enough with that, in my opinion. I don't know where she was going with it or what the point was. It does lead to one of the better chapters as far as the writing goes, but the overall doesn't really tie into the rest of the book very effectively, in my opinion. So it is something of a mixed bag, but I think the first book, in my opinion, was kind of something of a mixed bag. And so I know that there are people who have really strong feelings about this, that book specifically. But I thought the stories in here on average were stronger, in my opinion. There may have been fewer highs and lows, and it may have been more average, but I enjoyed this more. I think her sense of what technology would actually do, as opposed to babies selecting music. In the first book, I thought that was better. I thought that made sense. I think she used that technology in interesting ways. I think the concept of eluders, which are people who choose not to participate in this new technology and are something like ostracized from society because of it, I thought was interesting. I wish she had maybe done a little bit more with that. I wish she had maybe found some other characters at times to display that. This kind of goes back to the Hollander children. I think if she had replaced those chapters with other characters kind of showing, again, the detrimental and positive effects of this technology, I thought that would have been stronger. What else is there to say about it? I think some people... Who was this book for? I think there are people who are going to hate this book. And I think that there are people who are going to hate this book because for the first book, I think it was so tied to these two characters in time and moving backwards and forward through time and really experiencing their lives in interesting ways. But I thought, for me personally, the first book was also had its messes, and I think that it kind of pointed to the general chapter as just one example of a chapter that didn't really, for me, fit completely together. It felt like we were taking it out of kind of the larger context. The Jules chapter as well is another one that really wasn't as strong for me as I think it was for other people. And I think that this book, because it is a sequel and because I don't think that there's a character as interesting who is new as like Sasha or Benny, and they're mentioned in the book, they're in the book, but they're not the focal points of the book. I think that may be detrimental to some people. And I think the like science fiction-y aspects of it also may be detrimental to people, even though I think the stories overall are strong. So, and there's no real, like I said, there's no real... In the first book, she has these themes of time and how people change throughout time. And at the end of the book, she hits you over the head with the theme. This is what the book is about. I don't think she really does that as much here. I think the book is more mature in that sense. I think the book is... It's less about any one thing and probably more about these characters, this technology, and going back and maybe filling in gaps from the first book. I don't think that this book stands alone on its own. I think you do need to read the first book. You probably should read the first book again before reading this book because she holds your hand a little bit with some of these characters, but really you're like, I don't remember who was at this country club at this time, and I don't know who the relationship between these characters are, and I don't remember what happens after this chapter chronologically, so I don't know what the impact of this is. So that does happen a couple times in the book, and the more familiar you are with the characters in the first book, I think the more you're going to enjoy this. But like I said, I think there are people who are really not going to gel with it because of those reasons. I don't think... If you read the first book because of the PowerPoint chapter, yes, there are some similar chapters in this book, but I also think that the effect of it's going to be lessened for you. And I think if your whole thing was, I get to follow these two characters and their kind of interweaving lives, the book is, I think, much more diffuse than that. It's really not about any two people. It's really about Sasha, Benny, and their universe of people that they're connected to, and those people kind of taking center stage. Like I said, the Hollanders are in the first book. I think Ted Hollander has a chapter where he goes to, let's say that it's France. He goes to France to meet up with Sasha. And he mentions in his flashback of his children and his wife, so they're mentioned there, and they all get a chapter here. and for better or for worse. So that's the Candy House. I think there are going to people be who are, like I said, a little disappointed. I think there are people going to be like I was, pleasantly surprised, because I do think the writing has matured a little bit. I think the stories, at least for me, were as strong, if not stronger. Especially that middle 2/3 of the book, I think are really, really good. So that is The Candy House by Jennifer Egan. Next time, I'm going to be finishing up, I'm about halfway there, The Dawn of Everything. So if you've read The Candy House, and again, I tried to remain spoiler-free of this. I could have gone into spoils and done all that stuff. If someone said, what are the highlights? I really liked, there's a chapter where one of Lou's children kind of tells Lou's origin story. I really like that chapter. I like the Lincoln chapter quite a bit. There's a chapter with Bink's son that I liked a lot. There's a chapter with, I think Molly, who I'm not sure if Molly was introduced in the first book. I'm sure that she was, but she becomes kind of Chris Salazar's partner in crime, and you kind of see her back at the country club with Lulu and Chris Salazar, and kind of Chris Salazar's friend. I like that chapter. So there's some good stuff in here. I like the Lulu the Spy chapter. So there's some good stuff in here. And I think that if you are a fan of short stories, I think you'll enjoy this. I'm curious as to what the reaction for everybody will be. Until next time, bye.